Great Scott. Great Scott. Great Scott.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Great Scott, the only show where we pretend to turn up knobs on a podcast so we can look like we know how to do radio and what we're talking about. I'm Scotty V. Thanks for watching. So even though I don't have my own comic book store, and I don't have my own television show on AMC where we talk about how we got weird items in our shop and then we pretend to be Fat Man on Batman or whatever the hell we are, I like Kevin Smith. I've never really been a fan of any of his movies. I love his story about when he went to John Peters with his pitch for a Superman movie. And John Peters didn't want Superman to fly, didn't know what Kal-El meant, didn't know he was from Krypton. There's all kinds of funny things in there. And then later he makes Wild Wild West, which has the giant spiders and the gay robots that he wanted Kevin Smith to put in his Superman movie. So, and I watch Comic Book Men. Kevin Smith's not really on. He's on it very small. It's really about the comic book store and what goes on there. And who knows if any of that's actually real. When they bring in people to the shop and they have crazy items from the 60s or the 70s and they want to sell them to Walt Flanagan and then he wants to buy them because he loves them, or sometimes he sends people away because he just doesn't see a place for it in the shop. A lot of the stuff they buy, I don't think they're ever selling anyway because it's stuff Walt really wants for himself. But anyway, I digress. Kevin Smith is kind of a vocal guy. He says what he feels, I guess, which I try to do on this show. And he came out and said that clearly Zack Snyder doesn't know anything about these characters. He read one comic book, that being The Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller, and he based his whole movie universe on that book. And that's all he knows, and that's where his knowledge of the comic book stops, and that's where his research stopped, and that's all he even looked at to make this movie. Batman doesn't kill, Batman doesn't use guns, and even worse, he understands Superman less. Now, I didn't hear the podcast, so I didn't hear his elaboration on why he feels like Zack Snyder doesn't understand Superman. I have heard fans, mostly fans who I think miss the nostalgia of the good old days where "haven't I told you to stop telling lies" was the standard in Superman movie making. But they don't do that now. There's no red trunks, and Christopher Reeve is unfortunately passed on, so we're not going to have those types of movies anymore. This is a different way of telling the story. This is another version of a possible world where these superheroes might exist, just like Supergirl is on TV, and Flash is yet in another world. And we're going to talk about World's Finest on yet another episode of this in a while. But for now, some people just can't get past the fact that the bright, cheery, chipper, happy, goofy, cheesy days of the 70s are over, or that every movie about a superhero isn't going to be the goofy, cheesy, jokey, but also sometimes very good Marvel version of the story. I like the Marvel movies, but they are a lot lighter, they are a lot family friendlier, they are a lot more fun. And all these critics say it as if they're saying something profound. We don't. DC's not really going for the fun, cheesy, jokey vibe. They're going for more dramatic, more serious, and they want to be different than Marvel. I'm not even saying that it's better, although I've always been a DC guy. I love the Avengers films. I love Iron Man. I love Spider-Man. I'm excited. I laugh every time he says, "Hey guys," in that newest full-length theatrical trailer for the Civil War movie. I'm looking forward to it. I always am. But a lot of people go into the theater and they want it to feel like a Marvel movie or whatever. I don't know that Kevin Smith is one of these people because he's a big Batman fan, and I've heard him talk about Superman as well. The weird thing is, when he did the fan event online a week or two after Man of Steel released a few years ago, he was there with some of the cast members. He was there with Zack Snyder. He was all kiss-assy, and he was all, "Oh my god, I love this movie, it's so great, it's like the best thing, you clearly understand these characters, you know who they are, you like them, you're a big Superman fan." And then Zack says, "Oh, of course, I love Superman, I've always loved Superman." It kind of sounds like Harvey Firestein. He's a very scratchy, but I don't know if he smokes or what. But so it was kiss-assy, and it was thank you for all the compliments, and there was some stuff about the movie, but mostly it was just Kevin Smith being all kinds of excited and talking about how he loved Man of Steel, and it was great. So Now, before the release of Dawn of Justice, they did this little special on the CW where they talked about Dawn of the Justice League, and they talked about Dawn of Justice, and they showed a trailer for Suicide Squad, and Kevin Smith's daughter is named Harley Quinn. So he's clearly a big fan, and he's looking forward to Suicide Squad, and he was all excited about this movie, and he was excited about Wonder Woman, and he was excited about the Trinity appearing in the movie for the first time together on screen. And now the movie comes out, and he says it's garbage. Now, I didn't hear him say it was garbage, but all the clickbait online was, Kevin Smith says Batman v Superman doesn't understand the characters, and you go into it, and it just says on his podcast, he said that Zack Snyder clearly only read one book and doesn't understand these characters. Now, I will agree with him that the Frank Miller novels are set outside what would be expected as the normal Batman-Superman universe, where they are partners, they are friends, they do work together, they are on the Justice League together. And sometimes they may disagree. Frank Miller had a politically charged story he wanted to tell, and he kind of used Superman in a bad way, and used Batman in a really cool, brutal way. But the truth is, Batman doesn't use guns. Batman doesn't kill. But in those books, he kind of did. And what I'm getting from this movie is, this is a darker version of Batman, a version of Batman who feels like he's failed because he allowed criminals to live so that they can come back over and over again and then kill people and destroy things and make things much worse. So, in his addled state, in his angered state, he has decided, I think, that he needs to go off the deep end a little bit and finish these people off so they can't keep hurting other people later. We're going to see that story play out. I didn't get to hear what he meant when he said Superman was even worsely understood, if that's a word, by Zack. And I think what it is he's kind of down at points in the film. He looks to Lois and to Martha for answers on how he should proceed. And the thing is, Kevin Smith, it sounds like you haven't read it. And unfortunately, fans, some of you, it sounds like you haven't read it. Superman is the bright, cheery, happy, light beacon of hope oftentimes in the DC universe. He's the leader by inspiration. But in his quiet moments, in his times where he is feeling down, and he has human emotions. This whole movie was about showing how Superman was just as human, or perhaps more so, than Batman is, or than Batman has become at this point. He does feel anger, he does feel sadness, he does feel a sense of desolation and being alone. The whole 10 years of Smallville was about that, and to me that was much darker and much sadder and much more depressing most of the time. In this movie, Superman feels badly because everyone's kind of attacking him, and he doesn't really know how to go about it, and he looks to his friends and his loved ones to help him through it. I don't know what else Kevin Smith might have been talking about. There's probably more, and I didn't listen to his podcast, so it may be unfair, but the statement Zack Snyder doesn't understand these characters, and he clearly only read one book, in my opinion, well, I know that it's untrue. What about the Peace on Earth scene? What about the Doomsday Battle? Even though it wasn't exactly from that story particularly. What about Injustice, Gods Among Us? Where clearly the Flash's message and his armor in his little Back to the Future situation where he was talking to Bruce, and the whole putting your fist through a man and saying that she was my world and you took her from me. Superman does it to the Joker. In that story, you know, darker Superman, another version of Superman. So yes, that's not Superman, but maybe Kevin Smith didn't get that that wasn't really what Superman was doing, and that Bruce Wayne didn't have his heart actually ripped out. Maybe he thought that that was actually happening in the film and not some sort of nightmare that Batman was having. But clearly Zack Snyder knows about that story, because that's what happens in that story, and then Superman becomes a dictator and has soldiers kneeling toward him. So those three examples alone, and there are more, tell you, Kevin Smith, that that isn't the only story he has read, and that he isn't necessarily going with the Frank Miller version of what the entire universe might be if Frank Miller told the whole story about the Justice League and how it all happened. I'm not saying it's the greatest movie of all time, but it is one version of the story, just like the Donner films or Burton's Batman is another version. Thanks, everybody, for watching, and remember, I'm not Fat Man on Batman, but I'm a reasonable facsimile thereof. And he clearly only read that every movie from